Right now, there are almost 10,000 aircraft in the sky. That would mean that there is an estimate of 1.2 million people flying above us. Of those 1.2 million people, there's a very small fraction that make that happen, and they are the pilots. But what happens if, just like you or me, those pilots become fatigued? Essentially, the lives of those 1.2 million people in the sky, as well as each of us here on the ground, could be at stake. But what exactly is fatigue? What causes it? And specifically, what are the effects on the pilot's performance? Those are the things that this research project really aims to identify. For years, researchers have tried to define fatigue, but with fatigue being quite subjective in its nature, it's been difficult to come up with one universal definition of it. A lot of the studies that have taken place already have come up with definitions, but they relate back specifically to the context that they were brought up in. The main consensus that was kind of found was that there is a diminishing factor on the cognitive ability of individuals that are fatigued, and there is an effect on performance. But there were very few studies that actually related back specifically to the competencies that might be affected in a pilot, particularly on the short haul sectors, when they're fatigued. And so through this research, I wanted to relate back to kind of the 8 core competencies that ICAO state you require to become a pilot. Things like communication, teamwork and leadership skills. And I wanted to see just exactly how often it was mentioned by the pilots that their fatigue affected these factors. Many of the studies that do exist currently on fatigue in aviation have placed a focus on the long-haul pilots or even military cadets, for the obvious reason that these group of pilots would be very susceptible to jet lag, a common phenomenon associated with fatigue. But I noticed a bit of a gap in the research in that there weren't too many conducted on the short-haul commercial pilots, and so I really wanted to get to the bottom of what it was that caused their fatigue and if they experienced it at all. So the concept of fatigue within aviation has been quite a hot topic in recent times. I think there's been a bit of concern, particularly with the introduction of new flight time limitations and things like that, as to whether or not fatigue is, a definite safety concern or whether it's more just a limitation on the actual utilisation that airlines can get out of their assets. But I think evidence has shown that there is a true cause for concern with fatigue. There's been a number of airline incidents and accidents that have been associated with fatigue. And I also think that due to the nature of the industry, it being 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I think that everybody working within the sector would be susceptible to fatigue. Therefore, I think that research of this kind is invaluable going forward. Being able to define specifically what fatigue means to those it potentially affects the most, understanding what it is that causes fatigue, and determining the specific effects that it has on their performance is essential when it comes to, not only monitoring but mitigating the effects of fatigue and ultimately ensuring the safety of both passengers and crews alike.